The news breaks on a humid September afternoon in 2018, and it feels like the walls of CBS are shaking. Les Moonves, the man who transformed the network from a fading relic into America's top-rated broadcaster, is suddenly out. Not because of a ratings slump, not because of financial failure, but because of women, dozens of women, stepping forward with stories of harassment, intimidation, and abuse. Some of these allegations stretch back to the 1980s. Others into the very years when Moonves was the most powerful man in television. And while he insists that many claims are false and that encounters were consensual, the damage is done. You can feel the tremor in the industry, the way agents, producers, and journalists all lower their voices to whisper, if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. It is not just the fall of a titan. It is the exposure of a culture, the very culture that thrived under his rule at CBS. Welcome to 102 Hours, where you settle in with a story that pulls back the velvet curtain on power, secrecy, and consequence. Here, you listen in the quiet, in the hush of late night, where the glow of your screen feels almost conspiratorial. If you're new, I'm glad you found this corner of calm narration. Remember to like and subscribe, and maybe leave a comment below with your location and local time. You or D, be surprised how many others are listening right alongside you, all across the world. Tonight, we step into the boardrooms and behind the sound stages of CBS, where Moonves' legacy of success collides with allegations that reshaped the network forever. It's not just a story about one man. It's a story about an entire culture that protected him, until it couldn't anymore. You begin by looking at the man himself. Leslie Roy Moonves was born in Brooklyn in 1949, and for a while he thought his path would be acting. He studied at Bucknell, moved to New York, and tried his hand at the stage. The quirky tidbit that still floats around is that his early resume included guest roles on Cannon and The $6 Million Man. Not exactly star-making turns, but enough to keep him chasing auditions. Investigators still question whether those years taught him a lifelong resentment of actors, or simply gave him the insight he later wielded as a producer. Whatever the case, acting didn't work out, and Moonves pivoted to television development. That pivot changed everything. By the 1990s, Moonves had moved through Lorimar Television and Warner Brothers, climbing until he oversaw Friends and ER, shows that defined an era. Then CBS called. The network was in trouble, its audience aging, its programs stale. Moonves arrived like a storm, ripping through schedules, commissioning bold dramas like CSI, and pushing reality programming like Survivor. Within a decade, CBS was back on top, often the most watched network in America. Industry headlines crowned him a genius, and Wall Street loved him. You almost forget that behind every triumph is a human being, flawed and messy, capable of things that the shiny press releases never mention. It's important to note here, because accuracy matters. Moonves has never been convicted of a crime related to the accusations against him. Some criminal complaints were reviewed by prosecutors, but statutes of limitations often shut the door. Others were settled through civil or corporate actions. That doesn't erase the pain of the women who came forward, but it does frame the legal reality. The distinction is essential: allegations, not convictions, and denials on record. You, listening in the dark, deserve clarity, not sensationalism. Yet the culture around Moonves became almost mythical. CBS insiders described him as a Sun King, someone who controlled careers with a single nod. The mainstream historical fact here is striking. During his peak, CBS consistently dominated the Nielsen ratings, often winning the coveted advertiser demographic year after year. Quirky trivia. Moonves once appeared in a cameo on The Practice as a judge. A rare return to acting, though only for a wink at the camera. That cameo feels ironic in hindsight, considering how much judgment would later rain down on him. When the New Yorker expose hit, the industry froze. Ronan Farrow's reporting laid out patterns. women describing alleged forced kissing, unwanted touching, retaliation when they refused. Moonves stepped down the same day 6 more women came forward. For viewers, it felt like a plot twist in a show they never wanted to watch. For CBS employees, it felt like the vindication of whispers they'd heard for years. And for you, settling into the telling, it feels like the opening act of a drama where power collides with accountability. The world of network television, with its flashing lights and booming theme songs, hides its shadows well. But here, in this quiet hour, you can sit with the tension of both realities. The brilliant strategist, who saved a network, and the accused executive whose fall forced an entire culture to reckon with itself. That is where our story begins. You watch the story rewind itself, all the way back before CBS, before the glossy boardrooms and Wall Street praise, to a young man who never quite got the breaks he wanted on stage. Les Moonves is born in Brooklyn, 1949, in a Jewish family that prizes stability, and for a while he follows the more practical path. Bucknell University, a degree in Spanish, then a leap into the acting world. New York City becomes his proving ground. You picture him auditioning in cramped studios, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, scripts smudged with fingerprints. It is the late 1970s when gritty crime dramas ruled TV. He lands bit parts on Cannon and The $6 Million Man, blink and you miss it roles that hardly earn a living. He studies at the neighborhood playhouse, takes his craft seriously, but the roles don't come. The quirky tidbit. Moonves later admitted he kept a headshot from those years tucked away, almost as a private joke. Investigators still question whether those early failures planted the ruthless streak that critics say defined his later career. Acting, however, doesn't pay the bills. So Moonves shifts behind the camera, first as a story editor, then development executive. In the 1980s, he rises at Lorimar Television, shepherding shows like Dallas and Knots Landing. This is where he finds his true talent, not performing, but picking winners. It's a gift that can make you rich in Hollywood, and it does. By 1993, Warner Brothers Television names him president. His slate includes Friends and ER, juggernauts that make Thursday nights at NBC a cultural event. The mainstream fact you should note, by 1995, Warner Brothers Television under Moonves supplied nearly 1/3 of all primetime programming across the major networks. The man who couldn't land acting roles now controls what millions of Americans watch each night. You can't help but feel the irony. He once read lines written by others. Now he's the one dictating whose scripts survive and whose die in development hell. And there's a certain satisfaction in that reversal, though for him, it's just business. Industry peers call him decisive, occasionally brutal, and always tuned into what audiences want. His reputation grows not just as an executive, but as a fixer, someone who can resurrect careers and kill projects with the same shrug. If you're inside that system, you learn quickly, being on his bad side is career suicide. Moonves' climb embodies a classic American transformation, the failed dreamer who reinvents himself as a titan. But here's the softer detail. In those years, he still kept friendships with actors from his workshop days, occasionally meeting them for coffee, listening to their small victories. It suggests he never fully let go of that chapter, even as his power widened. That duality, aspiring actor turned corporate overlord, becomes a theme in understanding him. Of course, the entertainment industry is not just about shows, it's about leverage, and Moonves builds plenty of it. By the time he moves to CBS in 1995, the network is fading. Younger audiences think of it as the channel their grandparents watch. Moonves treats this as his greatest challenge yet. He pushes bold risks like CSI, bets on quirky hits like Everybody Loves Raymond, and strikes gold with reality in Survivor. Suddenly, CBS is the network to beat. It's an empire rebuilt, and at its center is the man who once couldn't land a steady role. Investigators still question whether Moonves' aggressive decision-making style, swift, commanding, often cutting, was shaped more by his years of rejection than by pure business instinct. That question hangs over him. Did he become powerful because he wanted control, or because he couldn't stand to be vulnerable again? For now, though, you leave the 1980s and 1990s seeing only his ascent. The mainstream press paints him as a visionary. The quirky fact that floats around fan forums? Moonves once cameoed in a 2000 episode of Becker as himself, an inside joke that hardly anyone outside the industry noticed. That wink says it all. He knows he's at the top now, but shadows linger at the edges. As his star rises, the culture around him begins to warp. Whispers start, and people wonder if this climb came at costs not yet fully revealed. By the mid-1990s, CBS is a patient on life support. Its programming is tired, its average viewer age is creeping toward retirement, and advertisers are quietly fleeing. Into this storm steps Les Moonves, the man who has already proved himself at Warner Brothers Television. You picture him arriving at Black Rock, CBS's imposing New York headquarters with that signature mix of charm and steel. He doesn't waste time. He slashes shows, reshuffles executives, and sets out to rebuild the network with the precision of a surgeon. For the casual viewer, it means new dramas, fresh comedies, and bold experiments. For insiders, it means living under the rule of someone who rewards loyalty but never tolerates hesitation. The culture is hard-driving, competitive, and centered around one question: what does Les want? The mainstream fact is undeniable. Under Moonves' leadership, CBS quickly vaults back to the top of the ratings. CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, debuts in 2000 and becomes a cultural phenomenon, spawning spin-offs and cementing CBS as the home of crime procedurals. Add to that Survivor, which ignites America's obsession with reality TV, and suddenly CBS is younger, edgier, and impossible to ignore. By 2005, the network regularly dominates primetime. Moonves is credited with single-handedly rescuing a brand once written off as outdated. But here's the quirky tidbit. Despite his image as a corporate shark, Moonves also nurtures a softer spot for comedy. He greenlights How I Met Your Mother, even after initial skepticism, claiming he liked the voice of the show. Later, when it becomes a hit, he enjoys pointing out that he trusted his instincts over the metrics. It yields a reminder that beneath the power suit and executive swagger is still a man who once dreamed of acting and still loves a good story. The fortress he builds isn't just about programming, though. It's about influence. Moonves tightens control over talent, over development, even over newsroom culture. He develops a reputation as accessible but intimidating. You could walk into his office with an idea, but you'd better be ready to defend it. And if you crossed him, there was no coming back. Industry insiders whisper that his power at CBS is so absolute that board members, producers, even other executives defer to him on nearly every major decision. Investigators still question whether this concentration of authority created an environment where bad behavior could be concealed more easily than confronted. The paradox is sharp. CBS thrives under his command, its shows winning awards and advertisers. Yet the fortress he constructs also shields him, making it difficult for criticism to gain traction. Employees describe the culture as Les's kingdom, a place where careers live or die by his decree. On the surface, it's all glitz. Hit shows, red carpet premieres, record-breaking ad revenue. But just beneath that surface, the whispers grow louder. Some women in the industry say they avoid being alone with him. Others claim that his charm in public hides a more menacing side in private. Still, if you were an average viewer flipping through channels in the early 2000s, you saw only triumph. CBS became the #1 network. Everybody Loves Raymond laughed its way into millions of homes, and crime dramas became a genre almost synonymous with the I logo. Moonves was hailed by the press as the golden architect of television's second golden age. His fortress was standing tall, shimmering with success. And yet, as you sit with the story now, you can feel the cracks already forming. Success has a way of blinding both those who hold it and those who benefit from it. For CBS, the cost of building that fortress under Moonves' rule wouldn't quite become clear until years later, when those whispers turned into headlines. From the outside, CBS in the early 2000s looks unstoppable. The I logo beams from billboards, its shows dominate primetime, and Wall Street analysts praise its resilience in an industry battered by cable and streaming. Yet, if you step into the hallways, the mood feels different. There's pride, yes, but also unease. Employees talk in hushed tones, not about ratings but about behavior. Some describe Moonves as warm, approachable, even paternal in meetings. Others whisper about moments that left them shaken, like an offhand comment that crossed a line or a hand that lingered too long. Nothing makes the papers yet. The whispers stay behind closed doors, tucked away like secrets people aren't sure they can afford to share. The mainstream historical fact: workplace culture in media companies at that time was already under scrutiny. Fox News was facing lawsuits about harassment in the early 2000s, and Hollywood at large was known for power imbalances that often went unchecked. CBS wasn't unique in having its blind spots, but what made Moonves different was the aura of invincibility surrounding him. He wasn't just an executive, he was the network's savior. Many inside CBS felt that calling out the boss was tantamount to career suicide. The quirky tidbit here is almost absurd. Moonves reportedly kept a couch in his office that staff jokingly nicknamed the casting couch, though the joke carried a sting. For some, it was harmless humor. For others, it symbolized the very culture that made them wary. Investigators still question whether leadership beyond Moonves knew about these dynamics, or whether silence was itself a form of complicity, and silence becomes its own kind of currency. Women who did speak up informally often found their concerns dismissed as misunderstandings. Promotions went to those who didn't rock the boat. Colleagues learned to avoid conversations that might stir trouble. A producer once described the atmosphere as velvet handcuffs, glamorous, lucrative, but binding in ways you didn't see until it was too late. You imagine yourself working there. On one side, the thrill of being part of America's #1 network. On the other, the gnawing awareness that power radiates from one office and shapes everything you do. You'd laugh at the jokes, nod at the orders, and file away your discomfort where no one could find it. That was the culture that grew behind closed doors. Moonves himself brushed off whispers, pointing to the ratings board like a shield. If the numbers were strong, if advertisers were happy, what else mattered? That mindset, woven into CBS's corporate DNA, would become its greatest weakness. Because once those whispers escaped the hallways and entered public view, the fortress Moonves had built would no longer protect him. It begins with a headline, and it feels like a thunderclap. In July 2018, The New Yorker publishes Ronan Farrow's expose, and suddenly the whispers at CBS spill into the public domain. 6 women, each with their own stories, accuse Les Moonves of unwanted touching, forced kissing, and retaliation when advances were rejected. For decades, these allegations stayed private, filed away in memory, passed in cautious conversation, but now they are national news. Overnight, the image of CBS's Sun King fractures. You can almost hear the scramble inside BlackRock as executives weigh loyalty against survival. The mainstream fact here is stark. Farrow AS article is part of the broader Tewers Me Too movement, a wave of reporting that topples giants from Hollywood to politics. Moonves becomes one of the most powerful figures yet to face public allegations. His response is immediate. He issues a statement denying assault, acknowledging he may have made some women uncomfortable, but rejecting the most serious claims. It is a careful defense built on legal precision. Still, the story catches fire. The quirky tidbit. According to some accounts, Moonves was at his Hamptons home when he first read Farrow's piece, pacing the kitchen as staff quietly avoided eye contact. For a man who spent decades controlling narratives, being blindsided by one must have felt like losing oxygen. Investigators still question whether CBS knew about these stories earlier and whether internal probes had been quietly shelved to protect their star executive. In the days that follow, more women come forward. Another New Yorker article adds 6 additional accusers, deepening the pattern of alleged misconduct. Each account is different in detail but eerily similar in tone. Meetings that turn physical, refusals that lead to professional retaliation, careers that wither after saying no. For you, listening now, it's not just about one man but about a system that seemed to punish resistance more than wrongdoing. Inside CBS, the reckoning is swift and surreal. The board hires outside investigators, employees brace for fallout, and advertisers grow uneasy. Publicly, the network speaks of its commitment to transparency. Privately, reports suggest executives debated how to protect the brand without demolishing the empire Moonves built. It is a balancing act that feels less like crisis management and more like moral compromise. The ripple spreads beyond CBS. Industry figures, politicians, and advocacy groups weigh in, framing Moonves as either the latest casualty of a culture shift or a long-protected abuser finally exposed. And for you, seated in this midnight retelling, the moment crystallizes. The fortress, built on ratings and influence, is finally cracking. And the first breach comes not from rivals or business missteps, but from truth-tellers willing to go on record. The floodgates are open now, and the women's voices carry into every newsroom in America. Some of them are actresses who once believed CBS could be their launching pad. Others are producers, assistants, or freelancers who thought proximity to power would be their big break. Instead, they say, it became a nightmare. In interview after interview, they describe meetings that suddenly turned personal. An unwanted kiss, a hand where it shouldn't be, a demand cloaked as an opportunity. They talk about careers that stalled when they said no, scripts that mysteriously vanished from development, calls that stopped coming. Listening to their stories, you can feel the chill of an industry where silence was often safer than truth. The mainstream historical fact is sobering. Faro ES reporting identified at least a dozen women with allegations against Moonves, many spanning the 1980s through the early 2000s. While each case was unique, the broader pattern suggested a systemic problem, one that echoed similar revelations at Fox News and the Weinstein Company during the same cultural reckoning. The Me Too movement was not just about individual stories, but about recognizing how institutions allowed these behaviors to persist. Yet even amid this heavy context, odd details emerge. The quirky tidbit. One woman recalled Moonves allegedly demanding she sing show tunes during a meeting before trying to kiss her. An unsettling mix of absurdity and intimidation that underlined the power imbalance. It's the kind of bizarre detail that sticks with you, not because it's funny, but because it shows how surreal these situations could be for those caught inside them. For Moonves, the defense remains firm. He denies any non-consensual encounters, repeats that he never misused his position, and reminds the world that no court has convicted him of anything. His lawyers emphasize that some relationships were consensual, that memories can be flawed, and that reputations should not be destroyed without proof. And legally, that remains the truth. No criminal conviction stands against him. But for the women who come forward, the court of public opinion becomes their only path to being heard. Investigators still question whether CBS itself discouraged complaints, subtly or directly. Reports suggest that employees often felt there was no point in reporting misconduct because the outcome was preordained. Moonves was too powerful, too protected. That perception, whether accurate or not, kept many silent for years. And then there's you, the listener in this moment of quiet reflection. You imagine how terrifying it must have been to weigh career against conscience, paycheck against dignity. To speak meant risking everything, To stay silent meant carrying the weight alone. When the women finally broke that silence in 2018, it wasn't just about Moonves. It was about tearing open a culture at CBS that had long chosen comfort over confrontation. And once spoken, those words could not be unheard. When you peel back the layers of CBS during the Moonves years, what you see isn't just a man, but a system. The company thrived on order, hierarchy, and loyalty, and for many employees that meant ignoring what didn't fit the glossy image. Documents later revealed that the board had received whispers of misconduct long before the exposés hit, but action was slow, careful, always tilted toward preserving the brand. That's the part that gnaws at you, not just the allegations, but the suggestion that the silence was baked into the culture. The mainstream historical fact is blunt. CBS's internal investigation after Moonves' resignation found that credible allegations of misconduct had been known to some executives for years, but those concerns rarely translated into decisive action. Instead, settlements were paid, non-disclosure agreements signed, and the company marched forward. The public never saw the turbulence because ratings were strong and advertisers stayed loyal. It was a machine built to hum smoothly, even when the gears ground against people inside it. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Employees joked about the Les test. If you pitched a show and someone asked, "But what will Les think?" you knew the project was doomed unless it fit his taste. It sounds harmless at first, a simple corporate quirk, but in hindsight, it symbolized just how centralized the power had become. When one man's preferences shape an entire company, the cost isn't just creative, it's cultural. Investigators still question whether that climate of control created the perfect shield for misconduct to go unchallenged. Inside those walls, the pressure to conform was immense. Rising executives had little incentive to question leadership. Human resources was seen as a formality, not a safeguard. And for women who might have wanted to speak up, the lesson was clear. Loyalty was rewarded, resistance punished. Even those who sensed the imbalance often told themselves it wasn't their place, or that they couldn't risk their own careers to fight a battle they might lose. For you, listening in the stillness, it becomes less about one man's downfall and more about how a company allowed itself to bend around him. CBS projected stability to the world, but inside it was a culture built on silence. When that silence finally cracked, it revealed a truth as unsettling as any headline. Protecting the fortress had meant sacrificing the people within it. The legal world now begins to take notice, though it moves more slowly than the headlines. After the exposés, multiple jurisdictions weigh whether to press charges, but the statute of limitations often blocks criminal prosecution. In Los Angeles, prosecutors review some of the older allegations from the 1980s but decline to pursue charges. Civil avenues remain possible, but proving decades-old misconduct is complex. You feel the frustration of justice delayed, but the law is bound by time, not outrage. Moonves remains unconvicted. Allegations are labeled as unproven, yet the damage to his reputation is immediate and lasting. Mainstream historical fact. In September 2018, CBS's board officially accepts Moonves' resignation. As part of the exit, he forfeits tens of millions of dollars in severance, though negotiations around his contract and potential payouts become a matter of public scrutiny. Shareholders voice concerns about whether the board protected the company at the expense of transparency. The network is left navigating a delicate balance between accountability and stability, its leadership under unprecedented scrutiny. A quirky, almost surreal detail. Some executives reportedly joked that Moonves' departure left a CBS-shaped hole in the office, referencing his domineering presence in the building, from the executive floors to his corner office with the panoramic view. It was a darkly humorous way of acknowledging how much one man dominated both physical and cultural space. Investigators still question whether the board's internal review fully captured the breadth of misconduct, or whether the fortress built around Moonves allowed critical details to remain hidden. For you, the listener, the tension is palpable. Corporate boards, legal frameworks, and public opinion intersect in ways that are often invisible. In the case of Moonves, the limitations of law, combined with the power dynamics of media, mean that some allegations may never face a courtroom, yet the stories endure. Employees, journalists, and the public all play a role in shaping what accountability looks like in real time. The legal system is one part of the narrative, but it is not the whole story. Moonves' influence on CBS remains a paradox. While unproven allegations cloud his legacy, his programming decisions continue to define the network. The industry continues to study both his business acumen and his alleged misdeeds, as investigators and commentators alike debate how much of CBS-AS culture was a product of one man's behavior versus systemic failings. For you, sitting here, this is where the line between public figure and private wrongdoing begins to blur, the gray area where truth, perception, and ethics collide. Then comes the scandal within a scandal, the police leak. Reports emerge that Moonves allegedly obtained confidential information about a police investigation into a sexual assault claim against him. The details are murky, but the allegations suggest that someone inside law enforcement shared sensitive material, giving him an edge in managing the fallout. The idea is chilling. Information that should have been impartial becomes a tool for protection. For CBS and its observers, it adds another layer to the questions about power, influence, and accountability. The mainstream fact is clear. In 2024, the Los Angeles Ethics Commission fines Moonves $15,000 for improperly obtaining confidential records related to a sexual assault complaint. The commission also rejects earlier attempts at settlement, stating that the conduct undermined public trust. It's a rare instance where an administrative body takes direct action, but the fine itself feels almost symbolic compared to the years of alleged behavior. The official record underscores how accountability can come in small measures long after the headlines have faded. A quirky detail. Some journalists noted that Moonves' nickname inside CBS was The Fixer, a moniker originally meant for his business deals but suddenly reframed in light of the leaks. Investigators still question whether other executives knew about these actions or whether he acted alone, raising the unsettling possibility that systems meant to uphold ethics were instead compromised. For you, it's impossible not to notice the irony. Here is a man once celebrated for his genius at programming, who now faces scrutiny not for ratings but for maneuvering behind the scenes. The fortress of influence that built CBS's success seems to have created blind spots, structural gaps where oversight fails, where information can be leveraged in ways that violate both ethics and trust. This episode also illuminates the complex intersection of corporate and civic responsibility. CBS shareholders, employees, and the public all respond differently. Some view the fine as justice, others as an afterthought in a long saga of alleged misconduct. For survivors, however, the action validates the principle that systems can, eventually, recognize wrongdoing even if delayed. And for you, sitting quietly as the narrative unfolds, the police leak scandal represents the subtle but significant ways power can manipulate not just people but processes, leaving a trail that investigators still examine today. By now, the fallout begins to hit the bottom line. CBS faces financial consequences beyond ratings and reputational damage. Shareholders file lawsuits claiming that the network hid Moonves' alleged misconduct, depriving investors of critical information when approving executive compensation. In 2022, a New York court orders CBS and Moonves to pay $30.5 million to settle a shareholder dispute, highlighting the financial cost of corporate secrecy and the protection of power over transparency. You can almost feel the tension in the boardrooms, where accounting spreadsheets and morality collide, proving that even the highest towers can wobble under pressure. The mainstream historical fact is undeniable. The financial impact of Moonves' scandal extends beyond settlements. CBS experiences internal disruptions, employee morale dips, and public scrutiny intensifies. Advertisers rethink partnerships. Some executives exit voluntarily, while others are reshuffled to preserve appearances. It's a sobering lesson in how corporate culture, when unexamined, can translate directly into economic consequences. Here is the quirky tidbit. A few reporters jokingly referred to the settlements as the Les Moonves tuition fee, for learning lessons about transparency the hard way. It's humor tinged with irony, the idea that millions of dollars pay for mistakes that were, in some sense, foreseeable. Investigators still question whether the financial penalties fully account for the broader damage done to workplace culture and public trust. For you, the listener, it's a lesson in the intertwined nature of ethics and economics. The culture Moonves cultivated didn't just hurt individuals. It created vulnerabilities that could be quantified in dollars and cents. Settlements, fines, and shareholder lawsuits become part of the narrative, not as a spectacle, but as markers of accountability, however delayed. The ripple effect extends beyond one man. It touches every corner of the company and, ultimately, the industry at large. And yet, as the network continues to produce hits and the public tunes into prime time, you realize that culture is slower to change than programming schedules. CBS may recover its ratings, but the shadow of these events lingers in the hallways, in the memory of employees, and in the broader conversation about corporate responsibility. Even financial penalties cannot fully restore trust once it has been fractured. The women who came forward become, in many ways, the quiet catalysts for change. Their courage inspires conversations across Hollywood and corporate America, shining light on behaviors that were long tolerated or ignored. Some return to the industry with renewed purpose, founding mentorship programs or advocacy groups. Others step back entirely, choosing distance over confrontation. Their stories ripple outward, challenging not just CBS but the wider media ecosystem to examine power, privilege, and accountability. For you, sitting in this gentle hour, it is impossible not to feel the tension between the harm they endured and the cultural shift they helped ignite. The mainstream historical fact. After the Moonves revelations, CBS implements new policies aimed at protecting employees, including enhanced reporting mechanisms and outside oversight. While critics argue these measures came late, they reflect a tangible shift in corporate culture prompted by public exposure and survivor advocacy. Quirky detail. One of the training seminars reportedly included a role-playing exercise where executives had to practice politely declining inappropriate advances, an almost surreal acknowledgement of prior failings. Investigators still question whether these measures will create lasting change or merely performative compliance, highlighting the difficulty of reshaping entrenched corporate norms. The stories of these women also illustrate the psychological complexity of workplace harassment. Many describe internal conflict, loyalty versus self-preservation, hope versus fear. They recall moments when a compliment felt like a threat, or when a friendly gesture carried unspoken pressure. For you, absorbing these narratives, it becomes clear that culture isn't just about policies. It is about the subtle ways power is exercised, sometimes invisibly, in everyday interactions. You also notice the broader impact. A new era of accountability is emerging. Journalists become more willing to investigate allegations, boards more cautious in protecting executives, and employees more vocal about workplace boundaries. Moonves' story, in this light, is both cautionary and transformative. His fall demonstrates the consequences of unchecked power, while the survivor's persistence shows the potential for systemic reform. Ultimately, the CBS culture shift is ongoing. The network's programming continues, but the environment in which shows are created cannot ignore the lessons of this period. You sense that the legacy of these women, their willingness to speak, extends beyond individual vindication. It shapes norms, policies, and expectations, leaving an indelible mark on the industry. The echoes of their courage resonate not as headlines but as enduring change, proving that culture can be rewritten, slowly, with deliberate effort. Years later, the shadow of Les Moonves lingers over CBS, and questions about the network's culture persist. Even with leadership changes and new policies, the legacy of concentrated power remains. Investigators still question whether CBS fully addressed the systemic issues, or whether old habits, favoring loyalty, protecting executives, and silencing dissent, simply adapted to new leadership. For you, listening now, it's a reminder that culture doesn't flip overnight. It evolves slowly, sometimes painfully, shaped by actions, policies, and, most importantly, the people who speak up. The mainstream historical fact: Moonves has faced civil and administrative penalties, including a $15,000 fine from the Los Angeles Ethics Commission and a $30.5 million shareholder settlement. He remains unconvicted in criminal court, though his reputation and career suffered permanent damage. CBS has publicly pledged transparency and new safeguards to prevent harassment, and multiple executives have resigned or been replaced in the wake of his departure. Yet the network's transformation is ongoing, and the echoes of past behavior remain in employee recollections and industry lore. A quirky detail: even years after his resignation, some insiders joke that Moonves' office is haunted, not by spirits, but by the memory of his commanding presence. An almost mythic reference to how central one individual became to an entire company's identity. Investigators still question whether this concentration of influence, combined with a culture of silence, created conditions that allowed misconduct to continue unchecked for decades. For you, this final chapter underscores the broader truth. Legacies are complicated. Moonves shaped television, rescued a faltering network, and left an undeniable mark on popular culture. But he also left a cautionary tale about unchecked authority and the consequences of prioritizing empire over ethics. CBS has moved forward, its programming still reaching millions, but the lessons of the Moonves era persist as a quiet, persistent reminder. The story winds down not with a dramatic finale, but with reflection. Culture is living, breathing, and slow to reform. It takes courage, vigilance, and continued commitment from both leadership and employees to ensure that one individual's power cannot override collective responsibility. You sit with that thought, letting the weight of it settle, aware that the conversation sparked by Moonves' fall continues in offices, boardrooms, and homes across the world. The story is both an ending and a beginning, a mirror to systems, individuals, and the choices we make within them. The late-night glow of your screen softens as you reflect on the journey we've taken together through CBS, its empire, and the man at its center. The story of Les Moonves is, at its heart, not just about scandal or power, but about culture, the invisible rules that shape behavior, silence dissent, and define workplaces long after headlines fade. You feel the weight of the women who spoke, their courage echoing through the corridors of media, reminding every viewer, employee, and executive that accountability cannot be postponed indefinitely. It is quiet, reflective, but it matters. You imagine the offices of CBS today, spaces once defined by fear now slowly adapting, implementing new reporting systems, training, and oversight. Employees tread with awareness, and executives balance ambition with ethics. Change is incremental, but it is real. And in this moment, you sense the subtle shift in perspective that can ripple through a company. Small acts of courage, policy changes, and the acknowledgement of past failings combine to create lasting reform. Outside the boardrooms, the world keeps watching. Viewers continue to enjoy television, sometimes unaware of the lessons embedded in the history behind the shows. Yet culture, like a tide, leaves traces. The Moonves era, for all its triumphs and shadows, becomes a case study in power, accountability, and resilience. For you, listening late at night, the narrative is both cautionary and hopeful, illustrating how individuals and institutions can learn, adapt, and strive toward better norms. Let yourself breathe as the story settles. The turbulence has passed, the lessons remain, and the world, though imperfect, carries forward with new awareness. CBS is still standing, but its story, and the voices that reshaped it, lingers quietly, urging reflection, vigilance, and respect.